Well, thank you everyone for coming to this MA this evening, or maybe afternoon, night, morning, wherever you are. We're delighted to have Sunil, who is the founder of Saddle Finance, who of course we are running bounties for bandits with, and you can ask whatever you want. The standard is, or the format is, I'm going to ask a few questions to get things off and get the conversation going. And then we will hand over to you guys after whatever you want. You can do so in broadly two formats. Either you can raise your hand. There should be a raise hand button. Vanessa, do you want to demonstrate the raise hand button? I'll give you a minute to find it. Or you can ask a question on chat. There we go. And I will then let you ask your question. Or you can ask it on chat and I will read that out for you. I'm going to go for just under an hour. So plenty of time to ask whatever you want. But let's get things going. Sunil, I always start with a nice simple question, get you started. Tell us about Saddle for those that don't know already.
Yeah, for sure. First off, thanks so much for having me, Anthony. It's always a pleasure to work with the folks at Encode. So a little bit of background about Saddle. Saddle is an automated market maker for peg value crypto assets. So what do I mean by that? Examples of peg value crypto assets would be stuff like stablecoins or tokenized Bitcoin. So these are assets that have their values pegged to some other like currency. So in stablecoins, that would be $1. For tokenized Bitcoin, that would be 1 Bitcoin. So previously, it used to be prohibitively expensive if you were trying to swap between different types of peg value or within like different types of peg value crypto assets. So if you wanted to trade like $1 in USDC for $1 of like true USD, this is a problem that I actually encountered myself in the middle of 2020, you would end up paying a lot of money in fees, right? So for example, for swapping something like $10,000, you would end up paying around $500 in fees for actually making that trade, right? And if you're swapping effectively what is $1 for $1, you'd expect to get a little bit more than that. So this is where Michael Curve originally came up with a clever algorithm called Stable Swap, which allowed for basically trading these types of assets with minimal slippage and fees. And so what Saddle has done is we basically re-implemented the Stable Swap algorithm in Solidity. Curve is written in Viper, so Solidity is the more widely known programming language that's pretty widely used in Ethereum. And we released this code under a very permissive open source license so that anyone could kind of use this automated market maker as a building block in whatever protocol or project that they may be building.
Awesome, thank you very much. And we always like to ask questions about our founders directly. How did you, I mean, you're an Uber, so that's like an obvious reason why you're a great dev, but how did you get, how did your career unfold in the TLDR version? How did you go from studying ComSci at uni to like doing the various jobs to Uber into crypto?
Yeah, great question. So I had I guess a fairly common story where back in around 2011, one of my buddies had messaged me and was like, oh, have you heard about this thing called Bitcoin? And obviously at the time I did absolutely nothing, but it really kind of like piqued my interest in the space and really got cryptocurrencies on my radar. And I started kind of following along through 2015 when there was the DAO hack. I was like, oh, Ethereum, they're actually building something like really, really cool, but you know, doesn't look like they're going to come back from this. And then fast forward to kind of like early 2017, the market seemed to be picking up again. And I was like, I've been a spectator for so long, I should probably, you know, buy some Ethereum and Bitcoin and really see what, you know, the communities and technologies are about. And so that's when I first got into the space, got a little bit more active in some like various community groups that formed throughout the kind of like ICO and like private pre-sale phase of 2017 to 2018, connected with a bunch of my friends that I know today. So some examples that are actually involved with Saddle. So examples of that would be like Avichal and Curtis, the folks at Electric, the folks at Framework, for example. And then how did we actually get into working on Saddle? And the beginning of early 2020, I was starting to get interested in kind of what folks have been building, particularly in the decentralized finance space. I remember this was right when Andre Cronje had released the first version of the interest-bearing like profit switching tokens, which was basically like there's a bunch of different lending markets where you could deposit like USDC, for example, but manually having to change where your assets are parked every like day or two as the rates change over time was like problematic. And Andre basically came up with a way to automate this. And so that had really piqued my interest in decentralized finance, started looking at different opportunities in the space. And this was right about when Keep Network, which is another protocol, was launching their first version of like trustlessly tokenized Bitcoin, which is called TBTC. And so Matt Luongo, the founder and CEO of Keep Network, also the founder and CEO of Thesis, the blockchain venture studio that we work with, was very active in their Discord. I, like, any community member in DeFi, kind of just hopped in their Discord, was like, hey, I'd really love to get involved. Is there any way for me to, participate and help secure your network by running nodes? And so we ended up just hitting it off, ended up having I talked his ear off about mechanism design and token economics and whatnot. And after some time, he basically mentioned like, hey, it'd be cool, if there was something for us to potentially collaborate on down the line. And so he had started working on a proof of concept of re-implementing the stable swap algorithm in Solidity. And at the same time, I had some ideas around how you could potentially integrate another protocol called Synthetics into the automated market maker model, where basically Synthetics has this really cool property where you can trade between different types of synthetic assets. So let's say like synthetic USD and synthetic BTC. You can trade with a fixed cost up to the size of their global debt pool. So you can basically do like very, very large trades, and it'll cost you around like a fixed, like I think it's like 0.38%. Right, for doing trades of any size. So the thinking was, if you had a bunch of different automated market maker pools that all had a single synthetic asset in them, you could enable really, really large trades that would hopefully be competitive with the rates that centralized exchanges offer today. And so that was kind of the idea that originally bootstrapped Saddle. And so we launched the protocol in January of 2021. Around, oh my God, it's almost been a year now. And so currently the protocol is sitting at, I think, a little over $250 million in total value locked. And we've done a little over $900 million in cumulative USD volume.
Very nice indeed. And if I may, obviously we've got the Bounties with Bandits program going on, which we'll talk about in a moment. If you were to project where you want Saddle to be in an ideal case, define your time horizon, where would that be and what would that look like?
Yeah, great question. So I really think we're moving towards a very like multi-chain future. We're just starting to see a bunch of different like L1s and L2s really start to gain any significant amount of traction with the launch of stuff like Optimism, Arbitrum, and like we have stuff like ZK Sync and others in the pipeline. And one important distinction between building in like Web3 versus building in Web2 is that the marginal cost of like forking a protocol and like launching a token is like very, very negligible compared to starting a traditional two-sided marketplace or business like, let's say, like Uber or like Airbnb. Right. So as long as people are able to basically like launch new protocols on new L1s or L2s and come up with like governance tokens and subsidies to give out on all these other places, I think we're going to see like very, very fragmented liquidity across all these new layer 1s and layer 2s as they start to launch. And as long as there's incentives, there'll be like mercenary capital that is kind of willing to go and, provide liquidity in exchange for some of these subsidies. And so you may ask, like, how does that fit into like Saddle? And so this is actually something that we are really hoping to tackle head on with our Bounties for Bandits program, which is like, how do we get Saddle to exist on all of these chains, right? And so this is where we're really leaning into having other like-minded individuals or teams like yourselves really help to deploy Saddle to all of the L1s and L2s that will pop up. We are more than happy to basically provide technical support as well as support on the community side and kind of like token economics and et cetera. But I think where I would really like to see Saddle in 3 to 5 years is just being deployed and alive on many, many L1s and L2s, have a thriving ecosystem and very many like governance participants that are really helping to like grow and evolve the protocol over time.
And as we start to take some of the community questions here, plans for other chains, which obviously this is more of a community given thing, which would you personally like to see first, and what sort of things should we anticipate?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I can answer to what we are looking at currently. There's like a bunch of EVM compatible chains that I will not do it justice trying to recite them off the top of my head. But I can tell you, we recently launched on Arbitrum, which has been going pretty fantastic. We've got a governance proposal up for launching another pool on Arbitrum currently. We've also been whitelisted for Optimism. So we expect to launch on Optimism in the next couple of weeks. And kind of longer term, we're looking at ZK Sync once that is up and live. And there's like a handful of other ones. I think if you go to our Bounties for Bandits page, we have a kind of a more thorough list of what are the kind of the top ones that we're looking at. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to start taking questions. People are lining up. No one wants to hear my voice. MG, you were first. Over to you, sir. You're muted. The best of plans.
Thank you. Sorry for that. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. My question is actually very simple. What's the status with Algorand integration and algo token integration and that chain? And if it is not integrated, yes, what is the plan toward that goal?
Yeah,
thank
absolutely.
you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So the team directly, at least, does not have any concrete plans for expanding to Algorand right now. I'm actually not 100% sure. Is Algorand EVM compatible?
No.
No, it uses its own virtual machine called AVM, Algorand Virtual Machine. But all of the standards, because all of the standards and all of the arcs on Algorand are directly and most compatible with EVM and ERC standards. So it is totally piece of cake in order to integrate what is on Ethereum with Algorand. And there are already bridges, markets, and everything integrating the two chains. So we can call them totally integrated and hand in hand.
Sure. Yeah. So we don't have any direct plans as a team to do this particular integration, but that is absolutely something that we would love to see as part of the Bounties for Bandits program. So if that's something that you would potentially be interested on taking on, please submit the form. The team would love to get in touch and help out in any way, shape, or form that we could.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to use the opportunity to shill Bounties for Bandits. For those who don't know, it is our, Saddle and our bounty program to build stuff for the Saddle Finance community. I'm putting the link in here. See it in some respects as a very long hackathon, but with far more flexibility and far more support, honestly. So it is ongoing. Please register on the website. You'll then get directly onboarded by the Encode team. We'll come and help you directly. We'll come and talk to you, do a call, onboard you, and then get you hopefully building something great. So if you do want to build on Saddle, it's a fantastic opportunity. Please do. We'd love to see Saddle and Algorand. The EVM bit, that might be the innovative bit there. Awesome. Let's go to the next question. Nishant, over to you.
Yeah, hey there. So I'm working with some of my other friends and some of the guys in this chat as part of the Algorand Accelerator program. Now I have a couple of probably general questions, right? How do you see more people coming from traditional finance? How do you see these people coming from traditional finance and entering this space? When do you see them coming into the space, and how do you onboard these kinds of people into the space? For some of my friends, like Dogecoin was kind of the onboarding thing into the crypto space. So how do you see that happening for the DeFi? And I have another question, so I'll ask that as well. So when do you go with a DAO first approach for a project? When is it the right approach? And how do you build and grow the community when you are at a really early stage, when you just have the MVP? Yeah.
Cool. So I'll take that in two parts. So for the first, for more traditional talent moving over from kind of Web 2 to Web 3, I'm based in San Francisco, so I can more speak to what I've observed just from working in the Valley and whatnot. I would definitely say this cycle, there has definitely been a lot more talent that has been moving from traditional Facebook, Apple, FANG level companies that are kind of jumping into Web3 than there were kind of last cycle during 2017 and 2018, right? I'd really say that from last cycle, crypto has kind of cross the barrier from being like more contrarian to being more consensus. And now you're starting to see a lot of like talented folks really see that the upside is a lot higher working in the space. And there's just a lot of like progress and like tangible like activity that's actually happening, right? Like last cycle, I think there were a lot of ICOs and pre-sales where people were raising a lot of money, but in terms of like actual products that were being built, you know, people were doing like Ticketmaster on the blockchain, and a lot of these things just like never really failed to become anything meaningful. Versus if you kind of look at what's happening in decentralized finance today, you're seeing like, you know, there's more than $100 billion, I think, or like roughly around that, that's moved into the space, you know, since its inception. And all of this activity that's happening on all these various platforms is all like auditable on chain, right? So you can see like real dollars that are moving between all of these various protocols, right? And so I think it's kind of a combination of all those things that are starting to drive more people to work in the space. How do you actually ramp those people up? That's you know, a much more difficult question. In my experience, the best thing to do is to have people get their hands dirty, actually interacting with some of these protocols day to day. This has gotten more expensive on Ethereum, especially more recently as the price has gone up and gas has gotten a little bit expensive. But that's definitely something that is like more feasible to do if you just want to mess around on like Polygon or Arbitrum or some of these other slightly cheaper like places to mess around with. And yeah, I don't think there's any substitute for just like, you know, put $10 in compound, like withdraw it, like go lend on Aave, right? Like just going and doing all these things, even if it's with like $5 or $10 and like looking through the transaction history, especially if the people are technical, is great for like starting to understand like how do these like Lego blocks actually fit together. The other question was about like DAOs and bootstrapping a community. That's like a very, very difficult question. And I think it really changes, you know, depending on what product you're launching and where you are at the life cycle. You know, ideally what will happen is you can launch something that people are really excited to use and you have community members involved from like the ground up when you're building it. But again, that's like very, very hard to do, especially completely organically. So like, for example, I was lucky enough to be involved with like YFI and Wiren like shortly after the protocol was like actually initially launched. I've been a multi-sig signer since the protocol's inception and kind of have seen that progress of the you know project go from like under $1 million in TVL when most people haven't heard of like Andre Cronje to now YFI I think has like the most unique devs that are actually contributing to it day to day, right? But YFI, for example, was the very first project to actually pull off a fair launch, right? Where they did not actually keep any tokens for the investors, you know, or the team. They gave away ownership of the protocol completely. The problem is that's kind of like a one-trick pony, right? Once people know that you're going to do that, then everyone was like, oh, are all these places going to do retroactive drops? People start gaming it. This is when you see stuff like, you know, what Divergence Ventures got called out for like sibling the ribbon airdrop. So, you know, it's I think a combination of a bunch of different things, right? So like, are you taking the right approach to launch? Are people interested in your product? You know, obviously being available and having a community and people that are talking and are active is like super duper awesome. And you can't forget about the memes, right? We just ran a meme contest with Encode, which I thought went fantastic. But if you look to really successful communities, kind of like the Synthetic Spartans or Chainlink Marines, right? They all have like certain memes or, you know, names that they can all kind of rally around, or like the Omis, right? For like 3-3 and stuff like that, right? So I think there's a lot of different elements for how do you successfully do this? And there's no like tried and true bullet for like, you know, you just do ABC and then all of a sudden you'll have a community. It's kind of a combination of a lot of these things. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Nishant. We're going to take some questions from the chat. First one, being the head of an open source, I'm going to paraphrase, an open source project means you have a question of governance. And in your particular role as the founder, how do you see your role in guiding that process and building Saddle out?
Yeah, absolutely. I view my role more as a shepherd rather than a kind of like semi-benevolent dictator. You know, as these protocols really mature and grow into something more than themselves, you can't just have the core team driving everything for perpetuity. You really want to see a lot of people come out of the woodwork and really propose different ideas or, you know, directions that you can really take things in. But there is something to be said of completely disappearing too soon. And this is actually a problem that we saw synthetics have when they kind of originally were switching from more of a core team member model to having a bunch of contributors. When Kane had stepped away, and they ran into some issues where the core contributors were just having trouble like coordinating amongst themselves, like what the priorities were. And Kane ended up coming back after like recusing himself because things weren't working, right? So I think there's something to be said for trying to progressively decentralize too fast. You definitely want to have more of a staggered approach. And this is why I think working with Encode and running the Bounties for Bandits program is actually like tremendously helpful, because it provides a really great way for onboarding a bunch of new community members like on to like what's the latest greatest in the protocol, what are people thinking about potentially building or expanding on in the future, and doing this all in a very like controlled way where we can make sure that everyone is having a good experience. Nope, you're muted.
I'm muted. That's awful. How long does it take to build Saddle? Which I think you've already answered, but let's do so specifically.
Yeah, great question. So we started working on the protocol, I want to say in about May of 2020, and ended up launching in January of 2021. So it took a little bit over 6 or 7 months. And I want to say the bulk of this was doing audits. And this was and working with auditors is honestly one of the biggest adjustments, at least and I think a lot of my teammates have had to make, coming from working in more traditional kind of like Web2 companies. Is, previously I was working at Uber, right? It's like, if you mess something up, you can open a pull request, have that merged, and like have your fix deployed in like 30 to 60 minutes or something. But when you're building for an immutable blockchain, you only really get to publish stuff once, right? You need to make sure that it's secure, can like custody funds, et cetera, et cetera. And auditors and going through the whole auditing process ends up taking a tremendous amount of time. And so before we launched Saddle, we went through 3 successive back-to-back audits. We worked with Certic, QuantStamp, and OpenZeppelin in that order. And that ended up taking, I want to say, the better part of like a little over 3 months to actually go through that. So in terms of like actually building and then getting the code audited to make sure that it was actually safe, those things took like roughly the same amount of time. But yeah, to answer your question, it was about a little over 6 months.
Very good. So let's go back to the raised hands questions. Let's go to Daniel.
Hey, thank you. I just had a quick question. If you have any recommendations or insights or useful resources to any university students that are looking to get into the Web3 or crypto space, if you could share any of those or kind of how you got into it. We already answered that, but just any insight or resources for a university student that wants to get into the Web3 space. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can take this more from, I guess, like a programming perspective, because I'm guessing that's what we're more interested in. So what we actually do internally at Saddle is we spend 1 hour a week doing what we call like a Solidity review of basically trying to like level everybody up in terms of their Solidity programming kind of knowledge. And so I can just give you an example of some resources we did as part of that most of the members of my team like really enjoyed. So there is a course called Crypto Zombies. This is like a very, it starts with the very basics. I'll drop links for this in chat also. It's basically structured in a bunch of different lessons where it starts off with like a very, very basic contract, and you kind of like add additional functionality, working up into building your own kind of like zombie game. This is a really, really great, I think, like first step if you're interested in learning Solidity. And then there's also this other kind of capture the flag like service called Capture the Ether. And this is what we've been doing more recently. I just dropped a link for that. This is a little bit more realistic in terms of you're given a challenge and then you have to kind of like solve it and test your solution on Robstit. So you're actually like writing real contracts and deploying them on testnet. And these also get like progressively more advanced in terms of like their exploits. So when they first started off, I was like, oh, this is great, this is easy. And then now maybe like 10 of them in, I'm like, okay, this is why smart contract auditors get paid the big bucks. But those are 2 really, really great resources if you're trying to wrap up on your Solidity. I've had a great experience with both of them. I would highly recommend checking them out.
Awesome, thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Daniel. Let's go to Paul for the next question.
Hi, Sunil. So thank you for doing the AMA. I'm working on a project called Algorand, which is an NFT trading card game, so built on Algorand. And we're looking to launch a token, an in-game token. And as you've launched your SDL token for Saddle, I was wondering if you could reflect on how it went, and if you do anything different, or if you have any tips for us.
Yeah, great question. So token economics and kind of design is an ever evolving field in the DeFi and crypto at large. Like just from the beginning of like early 2020, we've kind of seen the space cycle through like fair launches, retroactive distributions, people sibling all of these things. And that's actually one of the bigger things that we kind of had to deal with as we looked at how we were designing the retroactive airdrop and kind of like the token. Was originally we were planning to give away a larger amount of tokens to folks who would just like use the protocol in any way, shape, or form, right? Like if that was just like depositing a little bit of like liquidity or making a small swap, et cetera, right? What we noticed when we actually started looking at kind of like the data was that, and this was like around the time when Divergence Ventures got called out on Twitter for doing a bunch of like different Sybil activity. So I think this became a thing that a lot more people were aware that was actually going on behind the scenes, right? Which is where people will basically like, with $1,000 worth of like Ether or stable coins, send it all to one account. On that account, make a swap, send it to another account, make a swap on that account, and then like do this 1,000 times, right? And then they'll do this because the retroactive airdrop will like hopefully pay for their gas fees and end up being like pretty lucrative, right? And so we knew that people were going to be like trying to game the system in that particular way. What we did was we cut the allocation down that we were giving to that particular cohort of users to be like pretty insignificant compared to what we were awarding to retroactive liquidity providers, right? Because you can't really Sybil providing liquidity for the protocol because you actually need to have your money in the protocol for a certain amount of time, right? So that was like one big adjustment we made. Another thing that I haven't seen too many protocols do, but I think is becoming a little bit more popular more recently, is launching with a non-transferable token, right? So a lot of projects, when they initially launch, the tokens are tradable. There'll be like there'll be a floating price attached to the token, as well as like yield numbers, right? For like, what is your pool 1 or pool 2 yielding? So by having the token be non-transferable, our intention is to make it a little bit have a higher barrier for entry for folks to actually provide liquidity to the protocol, because they need to do a little bit of work to figure out like, oh, what do I think the like fully diluted valuation of the protocol is going to be? They need to kind of like look at fundamentals, do a little bit more modeling themselves before they decide to actually provide liquidity. So our kind of hope of doing this is that we'll attract a higher quality cohort of initial users at the beginning because of that, right? And then this will last for somewhere between 3 to 12 months, depending on whether governance votes to enable transferability or not before that. And if you want to look at like some other protocols that have done like similar sort of stuff that is kind of like worked out pretty well, ones that come to mind are like FutureSwap, DerivateX. I think those are the two main ones that did. Oh, and Ribbon also did somewhere like lock token kind of model. Yeah, so I'd say that those are two deliveries that we do.
I'll mute this person. Sorry, Paul, did you want to add anything?
No, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, good. I got so confused there with so many voices. Thank you very much, Paul. A couple of questions from the chat, Sunil. So first one, let's pick a nice one. What was the developer experience like on Arbitrum?
Yeah, I can answer this. I was actually the person who did our initial Optimism and Arbitrum deployments, so I'm like very intimately familiar with what the process is like. Working with Arbitrum was fantastic. So I guess to preface this, I'd originally started working deploying to Optimism maybe like 6 to 9 months ago. So it was like before they'd finished their kind of like OVM equivalence upgrade. So you still needed to make like pretty significant changes to your Solidity code in order to get up and running in Optimism. So my experience of getting our first pool up and running on their testnet ended up taking like many days, if not like a couple of weeks, because there were a lot of different things that you needed to work through in terms of just like weird edge cases or like how they, you know, treat certain opcodes, et cetera, et cetera. Working with Arbitrum was really nice because it was like literally you just drop in a new RPC endpoint into your like configuration file, and then everything basically worked out of the box. I was able to go from you know, looking at their documentations to having something up and running against my front end in like under a day, which was like pretty awesome. And so that really opened my eyes to why I think EVM compatible chains are really going to take the cake. And I think you've kind of seen this with like BSC and the rise of all of these other, you know, EVM compatible chains recently, is that getting all of the tooling, you know, from a developer perspective, just for free, so that everything just works, is like the importance of that can't be understated, right? Like as a developer, being able to just like drop in an endpoint and have everything work, as well as having stuff, tooling that you kind of need, like Gnosis Safe, like Etherscan, basically, you know, these things that are very commonly used day to day, really make the developer experience like night and day. And as a developer myself, I can totally see why folks would prefer deploying on EVM compatible chains over stuff where you have to write bespoke code, or, you know, they don't have some of these fundamental pieces of infrastructure that you really need to operate a protocol.
Awesome. And another one from chat. Will Saddle/Do Saddle want to see, in terms of the Polkadot community, EVM compatible parachains integrate Saddle, or have versions of Saddle?
Yeah, definitely. So I believe they have like, I want to say Moonbeam and Moon River that look very promising. I just had a call with those teams last week, so we're certainly exploring, you know, what that would look like. Again, if any of you folks are interested in potentially being the individual or teams to help with deploying onto Moonbeam or Moon River, we would love to chat. This is a fantastic, you know, project for the Bounties for Bandits program.
Very good. Let's go to Marina for our next in person. In person's the wrong word. We'll go for that in person question. Marina?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One, you can just say yes or no and don't comment if you don't choose to. But I would be curious, I would be very curious to know if you read the open letter from the, and if you noticed making the same mistakes again. The second question I have, and I typed it in a chat a while ago, is what is it that you do that, how low is your slippage, and what is it that you do that lowers your slippage? And I want to make one more comment. I was a little bit surprised, and I'd be curious why. You mentioned a couple of great sources for learning Solidity, but you chose not to mention Open Zeppelin, even though you mentioned that they were your auditors.
I didn't get the first bit of the question. If you want to repeat that, Marina. Who was the open letter by? You just cut out temporarily.
I'm sorry. The letter was open letter by the CTO of Sushi, of the mistakes that he made.
Sunil, where would you like to go first?
Yes, I briefly skimmed that. This is, I think she's referring to the mirror post that Joseph Delong posted.
Encode AMA.
Yeah, I don't recall exactly what he said. I would need to go like double check that to give any color there. So I'm gonna pass on that one. The last thing you touched on was learning resources. Yes, Open Zeppelin obviously are like a tier 1 auditor. Everything that they put out is like absolutely fantastic. The two resources that I highlighted are just, they're more interactive kind of like courses that we have personally done as a team. If Open Zeppelin has other resources like that, I for sure would love to hear about them. We're always looking for more things to do. So feel free to drop links to that in the chat as well. And was there a middle component that I missed?
Marina,
Yes.
what was which part of the question we missed?
The middle, I typed it out, so if you,
Slippage.
Oh yeah, what's the
question
slippage?
is, how low is your slippage, and what is it that you do that lowers your slippage, please?
Yeah, the slippage is configurable on a per pool basis. So right now we're using what has been kind of standard for most stable swap implementations, which is a 4 basis point fee. And then off that actual fee, there is a admin administration fee, kind of like lever that controls what percentage of that gets captured by the protocol versus getting distributed directly to liquidity providers. And so for that, we currently have the admin fee disabled. So all the trading fees that are captured as part of this 4 basis point fee are distributed directly to liquidity providers.
Very good. Thank you very much for your questions, Marina. Awesome. Let us go to Chip next. Over to you, sir.
Hey there. So I'm based out of St. Louis, Missouri, and I was wondering how you approached staying compliant with U.S. regulations and securities laws.
That is a great question. Also, I went to Washington University in St. Louis, so shout out to St. Louis. My lawyers, I don't think, would want us to comment on this question, so I don't really have anything to add. What I can say is that the regulatory environment is like constantly shifting, especially in the United States. There hasn't really been particularly clear guidance on a lot of things. So as a founder in the space, especially since our company is like headquartered in the United States and most of our employees are also based in the United States, we're making our best effort to make sure that we remain compliant and follow all of the current regulatory guidance going forward.
Very good. Let us next take a couple of questions from the chat. How do you find and recruit talent?
Great question. So first off, hiring in Web3 has become incredibly competitive right now. There's a tremendous amount of money that is flowing into the space, and money moves first, and then you start to see all the talent come shortly after. All of the protocol and kind of crypto companies are hiring software engineers, Solidity developers, et cetera. And now what we're seeing is a lot of the venture, VC funds or studios also start kind of like labs / engineering divisions. This was originally, I think, pioneered by the folks at Framework. And so because of that, all the VC funds are now also hiring for the same sort of talent. So it's incredibly competitive. What has worked particularly well for us has been leveraging our personal networks and kind of my connections from working at Uber and other startups in the Bay. So a lot of the folks that we've managed to hire successfully have been folks that I have worked with previously or knew through friends of friends that were really interested in breaking into the space.
Very good. What are your favorite projects apart from Saddle?
Oh man. It would be difficult to choose a single one. I have to say that Yearn / YFI is definitely one of my favorites, just because that was solving a particular problem that I was experiencing and kind of seeing the community really get together and bootstrap a protocol from zero to now Yearn has billions in TVL and is a living, breathing organism of its own, was particularly special to kind of see and be a part of. So that is always going to have a special place in my heart. Alchemix is pretty awesome. I'm a big fan of Scoopy Trooples and the self-replaying loan meme. They're doing some pretty awesome stuff. Also have to give a shout out to Synthetics. We use them for our cross-asset swap functionality. Kane has done a great job of really, growing and evolving the protocol from, I think, around 2018 when they originally launched as Haven. So seeing somebody really stick it out through the bear market and come out with a, really successful protocol like Synthetics this next cycle, is very inspiring to see as well. So those are only a couple of them. There are so many cool DeFi protocols. There's no way I could, give each of them a shout out. But those are just the ones that, immediately come to mind.
Awesome. What were the initial challenges faced by Saddle while launching the product, and what strategies did you adopt? This is a very I like the construction of this question. It's phrased very nicely.
Yeah, this is a very good question. In retrospect, again, I had mentioned that getting used to kind of like auditing times was a very new thing for myself. This is the first protocol that I have worked on and launched. That was probably the biggest challenge that we ended up facing, was how do you line up 3 audits and really plan your kind of like launch around that. We had basically completed those 3 audits and then we're slated to launch a couple of weeks after and announced that we were working on this cross-asset swap functionality that was powered by synthetics. And since we had waited for the completion of these 3 audits, it really pushed back our announcement date by like 3 or 4 months. Where in retrospect, that was something where we could have basically announced this was our intention and our roadmap, and publish the releases of the audits as they kind of like came out, rather than trying to bundle up everything and announce it at one time. And this is something that we learned a little bit more, you know, in the last like year or two, was that being more vocal about what you're working on is always better, even if you don't particularly have like the finished product there to show, just because you kind of get the mind share of saying that you're, you know, planning to do this initially. So that was like one challenge that we ran into, that, you know, there were definitely some like learnings to come out of.
Very good. Let's go to Devin for a little in-person question. Video question.
Hey, thanks for talking. I'm partner with Chip. My question is around your cross-chain capability. As you're deploying to these other chains, I mean, you seem pretty open to other chains. Are you taking into consideration like the security trade-offs of these different layer 2 implementations, right? That additional fee, speed and lower fees doesn't come for free. Usually it comes at the cost of security. So how are you evaluating that, if at all?
Yeah, that's certainly something that we're thinking about. At this point, I think most of the ones that we've already deployed to are looking at have reached, you know, at least a baseline level of consensus within the community and other protocols in terms of like, for any of these to really like take off, you need to have a like critical mass of like existing protocols or new protocols like there for people to actually like move their money to and start like experimenting with, right? And so we're seeing, you know, for Arbitrum, for example, right, they had like hundreds and hundreds of projects sign up when they originally launched, right? So that was like clearly somewhere we wanted to be. They've got like good tech, a working product. You know, and the same thing can be said of Optimism as well, now that they've kind of opened that up as well. You know, as we kind of look towards more L1s and L2s, especially as they're going to be like, you know, a plethora of them launching in the future, and we're definitely not going to be able to, you know, be quite spend as much time doing diligence and looking at all of these things. It's definitely going to be like a case by case basis, right? If there is like a project where they are clearly not on top of their security hygiene, or don't take on like auditing seriously, et cetera, you know, that's probably somewhere we're going to discourage people from actually deploying. But in my experience, most of these other L1s and L2s are doing a good job when it comes to, you know, general hygiene and making sure that the developer experience is good. That I'm hoping that won't actually be that big of a problem going forward. But yeah, it's definitely something that we're thinking about, but hopefully it won't be too big of an issue.
Very good. Go on, Devin, keep going, go.
Oh, I just wanted to follow up a little bit. I'm not super familiar with your protocol, but are each of these deployments to other chains, are they completely isolated? Like there's no risk of a vulnerability on one layer 2 affecting any of the other deployments on other chains?
That is correct. So right now, all of our deployments are entirely self-contained. The administration keys for the protocol are managed by a 3 of 7 Gnosis safe multisig that is entirely comprised of non-US community members. And so we have that same Gnosis safe deployed. We're currently live on Ethereum and Arbitrum, which both have like this Gnosis safe that controls the admin keys for the protocol. So right now, that is the current state of things. Obviously, going forward, we would love to explore ways of how do we more seamlessly combine functionalities across layer 1s and layer 2s. So, because as an end user, you obviously don't want to be worrying about things if you don't have to. And you know, this might be a potentially good project for Bounties for Bandits of how can you kind of like, you know, seamlessly move liquidity between different pools or like the same pool on different layers, stuff like that, for example. So I guess, yeah, the answer to your question is right now they are completely self-contained. In the future, we can potentially see that changing.
Very
Thank you.
good. Thank you very much, Devon. Let us go through some of the in-person questions. Got about 13 minutes or so to go. Emma's question, are Saddle hiring? How can I otherwise get involved? I can answer the otherwise get involved, but hiring, we've had that one before. Do you want to take that, Sunil?
Yeah, absolutely. We are hiring across a bunch of different roles. I will drop a link to our Angel List job board postings. Yeah, take a look at all the open positions. I think they instruct you to email my colleague Zim. But yeah, if any of these strike anyone's particular fancies, or even if you don't see a particular role that's an exact fit, but are interested in jumping into the space, we would love to chat. Please reach out and we can hop on a call and discuss what that could potentially look like.
Very good. And on the other side, we have both technical and non-technical challenges. I think we've still got the t-shirt competition, or swag competition, I think is still going on. So many ways to get involved in the community through the Bounties Bandits program, both happening and still to happen. I'm actually going to try and find a spreadsheet as I answer the next question, which has all the different things you could possibly build. Right. What do you think of the state of auditors in crypto? I like this one. Yeah, what do you think of the state of auditors?
That is a great question. There's only a finite number of auditors, especially if you're looking at like tier 1 and tier 2 auditing firms. And a lot of these folks will be booked through like maybe Q3 2022 right now. If you were to go to someone like, Trilobits, for example, they'll basically say like, wait until the end of next year. Where if you're a builder, that's like kind of difficult because you'd be expected to finish building everything right now, and then you sit and wait for 6 months for your code to get audited, which is unfortunate, obviously. We're starting to see different programs come out of the woodworks to kind of help with this. So an example of this would be like Code Arena, where it's kind of like a community audit program where they'll put up bounties for folks. I think they call them like wardens to all go and look and like try to find, bugs. And people are like gravitating towards stuff like that in lieu of doing a more comprehensive, like formal security audit. Hopefully in the future, there'll be more auditor availability, but it's definitely a challenge for protocols to get, especially good auditors in a shorter span of time.
Very good. 2 questions from Jamie. How do you take your coffee? I don't know if that's like means something else, or also Polygon ? So take that as you see fit.
Coffee, I'm a big fan of like lattes and flat whites. Although these days I usually just have a shot of espresso in the morning. Polygon, we are working with a one team right now. I think they're called like Mune Finance, who are working on deploying on Polygon. I think we might have one other team that has forked our code, but I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head. So yeah, definitely open to it. Yeah, reach out through Bounties for Bandits if you're particularly interested in making that happen.
Awesome. Question here, an interesting one about timing of a token launch in terms of building product and traction. Obviously, Saddle have chosen a particular path, which maybe you can speak to, but yeah, how should you use a token as part of the product journey and the traction journey?
Yeah, great question. I can speak to our particular experience here. The kind of like general consensus for US-based builders was that you wanted to completely finish working on version 1 of your protocol before you launch a token. You can't like launch a token and then build it afterwards. So by virtue of that is kind of why we proceeded the way that we did. Obviously, I think it's a double-edged sword. Talking to some of my other friends who have taken the other approach of launching a token initially and then trying to build after, they said it's had some like drawbacks in terms of people have expectations and it can kind of be like shooting yourself in the foot. But at the same time, then you do have a kind of economically motivated community behind you to really help propel things forward, right? So I think it goes either way, but the big thing is kind of going to be regulatory concerns and where you're based.
Very good. Jake asks, how and why did you get involved in eGirl Capital?
Good question. So I went pretty off the deep end in getting involved with DAOs. So it was the tail end of 2020. I actually founded my own DAO with Demir, also one of the co-founders of Encode Club, called Urza DAO. It was one of the first DAOs for liquidity mining and staking opportunities. We had around 25 members. I think we were up to like around $2 to $3 million in capital in the DAO, and we were the first official staking partner of like Keep Network, and we're running nodes for them. And so we ran this DAO for like 1 year, learned a lot of just like how do you organize people and how messy DAOs are. But it really kind of piqued my interest in these sorts of organizational models. As part of that, I connected with Peter Pan of MetaCartel. Eventually was able to get into MetaCartel Ventures, which is a similar, albeit like slightly larger investment collective, where they basically have a on-chain component and a bunch of like legal documents that tie whatever happens on chain to the real world and like an actual entity. And so we thought like all this was like really cool, but at the same time, folks were a little curious if there was a way to like have a truly pseudonymous investment collective that would be investing and kind of participating in various deals. And so I connected originally, I think it was like with Peter, CL, and like CryptoCat and a couple other like personalities on crypto Twitter who are all interested in kind of exploring this idea. And like most DAO things, originally it was like very, very unorganized. We all got in a Telegram group together, and it took us a couple of months to really, kick the ball and get things rolling. But we made a tremendous amount of progress. Now we're up to 14, mostly pseudonymous individuals. We invest all of our own funds, so we don't actually have any outside LPs or anything like that. And we spend a lot of time, coming up with content, especially for the insight section on eGirlCapital.com. I'd highly recommend checking out some of the articles that are up there. And yeah, the eGirl Capital is basically taken on a life of its own, and it's been a fantastic experience, kind of seeing this go from 0 to 1, and all of the like different friends and random pseudonyms that I've met through being involved with the group.
Let's go more as we edge towards the finish. Views on DAOs in general, particularly what legal status they might eventually take.
So legal status, I can't really speak to too much. I know that Wyoming has some laws in terms of like how DAOs are recognized, or DAOs that are LLCs or something. I am not a lawyer, so I'm gonna punt on that. I think DAOs in general are a fantastic new coordination mechanism. Previously, it was impossible for like, how did you want to get like 100 people that are geographically distributed all across the world to like act in the common interest? And like DAOs and tokens really enable that. As with any new things, they come with their own set of problems and other things that you run into. Just because something is like a decentralized autonomous organization doesn't mean that you don't have any sort of leaders or leadership. I think that's a big caveat that a lot of people run into. Like, you can't just like have hundreds of people come together without having, at least some people that are kind of stepping up to set direction. In addition to that, figuring out like tooling and like how do you actually run an organization that's structured like this is another big kind of like open-ended problem that folks are working on solving. So examples of like DAO infrastructure that's like starting to pop up would be like Radical, which is kind of like a decentralized GitHub, and Coordinate, which has come out of like the Urine guys, right? Which is basically like, how do you accurately gauge who is contributing within a DAO and incentivize folks to like participate. So in general, I'm very bullish on the space going forward. I think it enables a bunch of like really cool new use cases, but there are still some things that need to be figured out, but there are very smart people working on them. So I'm definitely bullish to see what comes next.
Awesome. And the final question. What was the idea behind the name Saddle, which you get all the time, I know, but for good measure.
So I'm not a math person, but it is a joke of on Saddle Point. Let me find the page which will do a better job of explaining this. Yeah, but it's like, I can't share my screen. It is a math term, so that it's a double meaning joke. So part of it was just poking fun at the math term. And then also we wanted to kind of like bring in the whole Wild West of kind of like DeFi vibe. And so Saddle seemed to kill both of those with, yeah, two birds with one stone.
Very good. Well, that I think brings us appropriately to the end. Sunil, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed it. I know everyone else has, and some good answers, some tasty questions as well, which I kind of like, which keeps everyone keeps it all very interesting. But thank you very much for spending time with us this evening, and for everyone, please do if you are in BAM Japan, it's great. If you're not, get in there. And please do keep track of everything we're doing, because lots of good stuff to come. But thank you very much, Sunil.
Thanks for having me. Please hop in our Twitter/Discord. We'd love to see more faces around.
Let's get the last Twitter and Discord will be dropped in. Otherwise, guys, the recording and the transcript for this will go up next week after a little review to make sure we've not said anything illegal. Probably me saying something illegal as usual. Thank you very much, guys. Have a good rest of the evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are, and see you all soon.